Hi, it's Carol here reading from her book. Tonight we're on chapter 29 from Witch on the Warpath, and we left Onk and Dog, I believe, sitting near the sand. Let's see what happens today. Chapter 29, Witches. Things were far from fine with Gristle. She'd assumed far-seeing and easy talent, but 2 days with Gru had reduced her edgy madness to insanity. Surely you just think about something and it turns up. Things, it seems, weren't that simple. They never are, Gristle muttered under her breath. She'd listened, grinding her teeth, to the explanations on divination, astral planes and projecting dimensions. The current lecture on thought invoked far-seeking was a complete bore. "Did you say something, Gristle?" asked Gru, annoyed at being interrupted. Gristle shook her head, stilling her body as Gru recommenced her insipid droning. Gristle's mind wandered as Gru lectured. She thought of all the nasty things she'd do to Gru for making her sit through this torture should she not be successful. Shame about that Lenny person, she thought. She'd enjoyed teasing him, and him thinking she could see him, the dolt. It was amazing what a gullibility spell could do. The force field idea had been a stroke of genius and no mistake. First time she'd used it too. He'd really believed it. Marvellous. Maybe she could use it on Gru. No, too boring. Couldn't bear to stay close to that toothless old crone any longer than she had to. "Maybe I'll melt her down into an amusing candle," Gristle grumbled. "It has possibilities, and the candle would last for ages if I'm careful." "The casting of the sight is therefore extremely risky. It involves concentration, focus, and stamina," whined Gru in the background. Gru hadn't needed to give Gristle the theoretical explanation to accomplish her request, but she was a lonely woman. Any opportunity to show off was a joy to her. Making Gristle wait gave Gru greater satisfaction. She needed to be careful, though, and not overplay her part. She was well aware of Gristle's reputation and didn't want to risk being hexed, or worse. "As I was saying," Gru interrupted Gristle's meanderings, "we are prepared." Gristle smiled, such an evil grin at the idea of catching up with her wretched troll it made Gru shudder. "Do you have the focus?" enquired Gru, trying to control her reactions. It wouldn't do for Gristle to be aware that Gru felt intimidated by her. "What?" snapped Gristle, coming out of her musings on how to kill her fellow witch. "The focus? The focus? The centre of concentration? I spoke about it at great length not 10 minutes ago," retorted Gru, annoyed with Gristle's inattentiveness. It was obvious the stupid harridan hadn't been listening. "You were listening, were you not?" Gru asked, in a deliberately patronising, tinged with a hint of exasperation tone. Inside her head, Gru giggled. The 10 minutes was in reality 40 minutes, but Gristle wasn't to know. Gru was correct. Gristle did have a stupid side. "Was it only 10 minutes?" Gristle muttered. She felt sure it had been at least 10 hours. She was never one for patience. Gru interrupted Gristle's thoughts, asking for the focus a second time. What was wrong with the old hag? Gru wondered. Whilst Gristle was not what one would call sane, she was lucid and coherent when dealing with her peers. Maybe she'd turn mad like old Hildegard, Gru thought. Last heard, she'd been found stuffing helpless hedgehogs down public toilets. Poor things. Such a waste when they tasted so good. Sidney Holt was out walking his beloved dog Jasper, a Heinz 57 mongrel, across the empty Ramsgate beach. The outgoing tide sighed between his walking shoes like an asthmatic wheezing in and out. The sea retreated against its will as the moon forced it backwards. Its failure to take over the land for the second time in 24 hours continued. Its fight for supremacy ended in the same result as yesterday. Moon 2, sea 0. Everything was right in the world for Sidney. Today he'd faced down his line manager at work, receiving the rise he'd asked for and deserved. Sidney had worked for 22 years as senior salesperson for a local double glazing company. Never in all that time had Sidney asked for a rise, but now his 18-year-old daughter Emma was off to university. The family was finding it hard to make ends meet. The bulk of Sidney's salary came from the good amounts of commission he earned, but his basic flat rate pay was pitiful, only 10 pence above the national minimum wage. His second wife, Trudy, had nagged him to be a man and step up to the plate and other unhelpful adages. She wasn't the most supportive person. He missed Lisa, his first wife. Sidney felt there wasn't anything he couldn't do, nowhere he couldn't go, at least for an hour or so. Despite his minor victory, his newfound inner strength, Sidney couldn't muster enough determination to go home. He wandered along the beach following Jasper, who snuffled the seaweed and rolled in the mess left behind by the donkeys. "Is this what I want in life?" he asked Jasper. He knew it wasn't, but to voice his dreams out loud might give them substance, and he wasn't ready to move on to another life just yet. He sat on the concrete bench facing the truculent sea, smiling as he watched Jasper chasing the foaming white wave tops, getting soaked to the skin. Trudy would complain when he went home. She always did when he came home with Jasper, smelly and wet from the beach. Tonight, Sidney could cope with her moaning. It was a good day. A step in the right direction, as Trudy would say. At the other end of the beach, unbeknown to Sidney, Onk and Dog arrived to play. Jasper pelted up the sands to investigate this intruder, this new dog. Sidney watched bemused as his dog sniffed and wagged his tail and greeted another doggy friend, despite no dog being present, at least to Sidney's eyes. Together, Dog and Jasper played, running the length of the sands. They pounced on each other, they chased each other in turns, both owners smiling at their antics, though only Onk saw two dogs. Sidney became more puzzled when Jasper started whining and staring into the sky. Dog, after several practice sessions, was capable of launching himself skyward. Sidney was even more confounded when dead seagulls started dropping out of the air one by one. Not only were they dead, but they were roasted to a crisp. Dog proved to be really good at catching the seagulls, now he could fly. Whilst Onk wouldn't kill a live animal out of ethical sensibility, he'd take full advantage of any situation where someone else resolved this issue for him. Dog chasing seagulls along the beach in the early evening light, then zooming 6 feet high into the air and roasting them in mid-flight was a positive boon to their relationship. The lazy and brutish gulls, used to lifting into the air a microsecond before stupid dogs approached at speed, got the shock of their lives as this dog chased them right up into their precious, safe blue skies. 7 were cooked in a turn before they collected themselves. The fatal 7 fell back to earth with 7 loud thuds, far quicker than they'd left. The remaining 6 flapped away, shrieking their grief out loud to anyone close who could hear. Sydney was stunned. Jasper looked a bit surprised too. Both human and dog edged away from the roast birds lying in a heap before them. Sydney wasn't stupid. Something weird was happening. With that, Dog, a creature not of Earth's realm, shimmered and crossed into Sydney's dimension, becoming visible to him. Sydney stood, mouth agape, as a shiny, metallic, dog-sized dragon appeared out of nowhere and proceeded to eat his seagull dinner like it was the most natural thing in the world. Too petrified to move, Sydney watched the incredible creature, terrified but spellbound. Some inner sense told him this was a pivotal moment in his life. Onk and Dog, oblivious to Sydney and Jasper's fear, feasted to burping level and strode back down the beach to their subterranean retreat. With one backward grin at Jasper, Dog retreated back across the magical plain. Sydney Holt knew from that point there were more important things in his life to be done. Catching hold of Jasper, he attached his lead. "That's something you don't see every day, huh, Jasper?" said Sydney, bending down to scratch Jasper's ears. Jasper whined in pleasure and agreement. "You know, old pal, there are things I still want to do and see in my life. That was one I hadn't counted on, though. A dragon. Fancy that." Sydney left the beach and went home to tell Trudy that he and Jasper were leaving. He'd start a new life with Jasper in Ireland. He'd always wanted to live in Kilkenny, his ancestral home. Who knows? I might even see a leprechaun. Gru, meanwhile, was exasperated with Gristle. Did the old woman listen to anybody but herself? Obviously not. Without incurring Gristle's legendary displeasure, Gru explained again, as if to a child. The best way to make contact is with an item belonging to the individual concerned. Do you have such an item? Or focus, as we in the profession called it?" she inquired, her tone becoming ever so slightly sarcastic without her knowledge. Gristle thought about it. Her evil smile deepened further, if that were possible, without her head splitting in half. Gru felt sure she heard the gates to hell open and Beelzebub's face appear in the depths of Gristle's features. Maybe Gristle is going mad, speculated Gru, trembling on the inside at the implications of this event. Back in Thanet, the castle shuddered, and it shifted within its enthralled state. It sensed the fairy babe awake when Ankh opened the walnut shell. Events were being set in motion. The enchantment laid over the castle on Thanet a millennia ago was the result of a courageous battle between a troll warrior maid and an evil stone witch. Enchantments have specific conditions to end their ensorcerment. Otherwise, they're not enchantments, they are hexes or spells. While both of these are devastating in their own way, they are restrictive and may be broken by higher magic. Enchantments have their own defined criteria. A prime example is the tale of Pharmacia and the Growling Worm, but that is a story for another time. The simplest enchantment requires one specific event to occur, like, for example, the one a watcher might use for fairy babes, which concludes when the babe's rightful parents appear. However, a nasty person such as a cruel stone witch might put umpteen conditions on an enchantment to ensure it can never be fulfilled. They can be the most absurd things she can think of, and stone witches have very bizarre imaginations. Maddie Grove, the malodorous, bungled enchantment condition, when hell freezes over, was legendary. Maddie Grove failed to specify which substance hell would freeze over with, and the frozen methane rate was particularly bad the following year. Thus, her supposed invincible condition was thwarted, which was unfortunate, because Nignag the Nauseous exacted his revenge tenfold upon her when the enchantment lifted. Maddie Grove didn't get an enchantment in return. Nignag learnt from her mistake. She received a hex which turned out to be far, far worse. Her bones melted clean away, and she became a giant puddle of ooze. These days she keeps to herself in the Dutch fenlands, raising piebald ferrets who don't mind the fact she has no skeleton. They run over her just the same. The castle was not what it seemed, for it contained the essence of the courageous troll maiden. Whilst fighting the evil stone witch in service to the fairy king, the maiden had been imprisoned inside the fabric of the building, a sad reward for her bravery. The original stone building had fallen into ruin long ago, but its unwilling captive maintained its spirit, and therefore its outward appearance continued. The witch, whose name didn't make it down the length of time, made sure no one could release the warrior troll by inserting several tricky clauses. To make things more impossible, the stone witch told no one the specifics, except of course the troll maiden, just before she transformed her. Like all villains, the witch was unable to resist the urge to monologue moments before she committed her crime. "No one will ever know," she cackled, revelling in her heinous misdeed. "First, the sky has to rain fish. Second, the trees will bow down to a troll warrior who will appear with his heart's desire. Third, the warrior will give his heart's desire away." She bent over in hysterics, thrilled to pieces with her enchantment conditions. She skipped around the petrified maiden as she counted them off on her 6 fingers twice. She rationalised that fish never left the sea. There were no warrior trolls. She'd ensnared the last one, and trolls would never, ever give anything away, fighting till death for it. They were safer than banks if you wanted something protected. Good luck getting anything back from them, she giggled. She had no clue what a troll's heart's desire might be, and she was pretty sure a troll wouldn't have a clue either. She'd wanted an unachievable item in the enchantment to prevent it being broken. And all within a moon's rise, she tittered, adding insult to injury. That'll teach you to thwart my plans, my lovely, she mumbled over her shoulder as she strolled away into the woods and out of history. The enchantment was further enforced by the same witch supplying the entire southeastern troll population with an addictive drinking brew which they instantly loved, called scrumpy. Over the centuries, the corrosive scrumpy reduced trolls' brains to a pile of disjointed, food-related mush. As time strolled by, the trolls lost their way till morals, principles, valour and honour, their warrior codes, were a thing of the past. Fortunately, Onk hated apples in any form. Onk was a genetic throwback to those earlier times. Residing with the hermit had little to do with his speech, values or feelings evolving. They would have done so anyway, eventually. Granted, human contact had sped up the process, but Onk's genetic line dated back to a time when troll warriors travelled the realms seeking quests to win fair troll maidens' hands. They were notable creatures, articulate and intelligent, though not incredibly so. And knowing what we do about Onk, that's where we're going to leave it today. Join me next time to see what happens. Goodbye.